Okay. Let's get things ready. Here we go. Another one. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to my studio. My name's Michael Markowsky. This is my 301st live stream. Over the past 2 years, I've been here painting and drawing and teaching photography classes as well. I did that too way back when. So I'm super excited to embark on another 100 episodes, and we'll see how far we end up going. Today what we're going to be looking at is recreating another painting by another one of my very favorite artists. Today we're going to be looking at the art of Klee, and we are going to attempt to recreate this masterpiece that he created here called Cat and Bird from 1928. This is really at the high point of his career. He dies about 12 years after this painting was created, and yeah, there's lots of stuff to get into in here because a lot of stuff is happening in the world around the time that he made this painting, and in his own life as well. So let's jump right into it. Let's start talking about what we want to do today. So this is sort of the process that we're going to embark on today. What we're going to talk about is how to get the image onto the canvas. There's lots of different, you could just draw it on there, but I have created a template which you can use. We'll look at that shortly here. Then we're going to prepare the surface. While that's all drying, we'll talk a little bit about the artist himself and how he became who he was, and the legacy that he left. Then we'll begin maybe doing a little bit of underpainting and then begin working on the painting itself. And then by the end, we'll have 20 minutes before we finish, we'll do our finishing touches and the side-by-side comparison. Today's painting should take us about an hour and a half or so to get through to the end, so it should be about a 2-hour-long episode by the time we're all done, just as a quick heads up. So just a few things right before we launch in. Please like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. All of those of you watching right now, if everyone hit the like button, that would be awesome. And then also let your friends know, post a photograph of the painting you created, not only on your own Facebook group or Twitter or TikTok or wherever else you're using, Instagram, but also join our Facebook group and upload the artwork that you created to our Facebook group. And that's once a month. We go through all of that, and I give people advice on how to make their paintings even better than they already are. And just celebrate the fact that people are making art in general, right? I think if we were all making art, we would probably live in a much happier world that wasn't engulfed in war right now. But we're not going to talk about any of that today, because let's get started with the image transfer. So you'll see that there's a Dropbox link in the description below that has not only this image, but a tracing which I did as well. And not only that, you'll see that there's actually more images in here. Here's another painting. I love this painting. I was even considering maybe doing 2 today, but that's just crazy. And that always makes for these really long episodes that I try to do 2, paint 3, 4. Here's another one and an outline for that. And I also really like this one, but I think this one's a little bit more complex. You're certainly welcome to embark on it, but of all of them, even this one, which deceptively looks really simple, is maybe a little bit tricky. So this one I think is the easiest of all the most famous Klee paintings. So let's take a look at where you can get that tracing. Now here's the Facebook group that I mentioned before. Wow, look at that, Lori, awesome. So people are uploading their, oh wow, these are cool. So that's super inspiring. You see people doing their own little twists on the paintings that we're doing in class. I strongly encourage you to join this group. It's an awesome community of really super supportive artists, people at various different points in their creative journey. So if we look in the Dropbox folder, again, the link is down below, you'll see a whole bunch of, there's I think 141 folders. These are all paintings we've already done, except for maybe the last 10 at the very bottom of this folder. Those will be coming. If you tune in 100 episodes from now, we'll be on, there'll be 200 folders in here anyway. We go all the way back up. Here's where we are today, Paul Klee. And these are all the files that I just mentioned. The reason why there's a little bit more is that each of the printouts come in JPEG and a PDF, just whatever's easier for you to print out, right? So I forgot to get this queued up. So while that's loading up, I'll show you come on. I'll get these over here. I also did one again for this painting as well, but I decided to just focus on one thing today. So let's get this. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this video here, and then I'm just going to talk over it while that's happening. You can see I'm using a 9x12 sized canvas, right? That's what I've been using for the past 2 years. Every painting I've done is on the same size, which is really good because it's nice and small, and it helps us get something accomplished in a relatively short period of time. If you're working much bigger, it takes longer. There's more paint you need. If you work smaller, it actually can take you longer because you got to do all those little details. So I printed out that outline on my inkjet printer here at home. You don't need anything fancy or special to do it. And then I'm just going to trace over top of all of these lines, and I've got a piece of carbon paper in between, right? You can use graphite paper, carbon paper, they're all the same. You can get different colors too if you want. You can also get these at your fabric stores, because a lot of people use this same technique to get a pattern onto fabric before they cut it. All right, and then I'm going to do these diagonal lines that are radiating out of the center of between the eyes of the cat here with a ruler. Let's just scroll through. Oh, that was too quick. Where'd it go? There. That's what it looks like when we finally peel the tape off. And then when you've done that, you've got this image. All right. Okay, so I like to keep these and potentially to paint, do another version if you like. You can see I didn't get quite the corner here of that ear, but that's not going to be something that I can't overcome. So now that we've got the image transfer in place, let's talk about how we're going to proceed here with the next step, which is called our Imprimatura, right? So that's the first coat of paint that we put onto a painting. It helps obliterate the white, blank white of the canvas. And maybe before I go into that, I just want to show you, these are the paints that I'm about to use to make this painting. This is the brand of paint that I use, and when I refer to a cool yellow or a warm yellow, this is exactly what I'm using. Now, I'm not sponsored by Amsterdam Paint. They don't pay me to do anything. I just like them because they're relatively cheap and they're pretty high quality. But there's other brands you can use. Here's Golden's brand. Here's Liquitex. Here's Winsor & Newton. I know I'm going fast because I've talked about this before, and I did an entire episode talking all about these paints. So you can watch that. It's in one of the very first folders in the video description down below in the Dropbox folder. Peebo, you can always just pause, write this stuff down, rewind. Holbein and Daler-Rowney, right? Those are the three, or not, I don't know how many were there, 6 or so different brands that are most commonly used here. So to get, what I'm going to do is what I normally do, which is apply a warm yellow onto this surface to get it started. And yeah, it looks like this would be this. I'm going to stay with my old habit, and I'm going to drop all my paints on the floor there. Thank goodness they're all in tubes. And you can drop everything on the floor if you like. I don't know if you need to do that for today's painting, but you should feel welcome. I always say that I get to do all of the mistakes live on camera, and then you can learn from my mistakes. Such as, maybe I need to get a new box for all those paints so that they don't that doesn't happen to me. That would be a shame for that kind of thing to happen on a carpet or a nice hardwood floor. You know, that if there was actually some wet paint in there that spilled out onto things. Anyway, I'm using my warm yellow, and I'm mixing a little bit here with some white, and that's just going to help get a nice golden color onto this canvas right off the bat. And it does a whole bunch of different things, and again, we've talked about this in depth about why I do this. You could certainly skip this step and just continue. You could just, you know, paint the colors I'm about to paint on top of this, and your painting will be absolutely fine. But I always just find this just kind of quite liberating. I start with a canvas that doesn't have that white staring back at me, taunting me. Ha ha ha! You just try to make a good painting. What are you gonna do first, Michael? I bet you can't think of... Oh, you're going to put yellow. Oh, okay. All of a sudden, that scary voice just disappears, because now I've got the whole thing covered. You've got the whole canvas covered in paint. You got the whole canvas covered in paint. You got the whole big canvas covered in warm yellow. So, thanks for everyone's patience. I know we started about 10 minutes late. I was just, I did a quick spontaneous episode just wrapping up Matisse Week. I had to do a little bit of touch-ups on some of the paintings that we created, and I just wanted to see them all for the first time side by side just to see how they turned out. And at the very end of that episode, I did a little side-by-side comparison, and I asked people to vote as to which ones they liked best. So if you want, you can go watch that episode. You can just skip right to the end and then leave your vote in the comments below. That would be cool. I would love to hear which ones you think are best. Or you could see that Lori did something totally different for hers, right? And I love that too. That makes me super excited. I love seeing different interpretations of well-known paintings. That, I think, makes painting feel alive, and that it's still, you know, creating ripples in the world. You know, art is, every time an artist makes a painting, it's sort of like putting a little child out into the world, and you don't really have too much control over what it does after it leaves the house. You hope that you've done your job. So I think I've just cleaned this brush all a second ago, but okay. That's good. I've got my Imprimatura on the canvas. So while this is slowly drying, let's take a look here at the biography of Paul Klee. So, where should we? Let's just go right to the Wikipedia page here. I haven't read too much of this. I had a whole stack of books which I returned, I think, just a couple days ago. So Paul Klee, born 1879, dies in 1940 at age 60, which is, you know, maybe on the younger side for a lot of artists. A lot of artists live long, happy lives. which I think is a pretty, you know, I always think about that when I'm especially more and more I've done 200 of these episodes, and I see like how many artists have lived really long lives. It's like, huh, you know, there's something to be said about doing this activity, which brings you serenity and calmness and relaxation and focus. It's good for the brain, good for the heart and the spirit. Anyway, let's talk about Paul Klee. So we'll get down to some of the important achievements of his life here, but let's sort of just talk about maybe where he's from. So he's born in Switzerland, just outside of Bern, and both of his parents were musicians. His father was a music teacher, and his mother was a fairly well-known singer. Right, so it probably wasn't a surprise that when Paul was growing up, his parents encouraged his musical interests, and he became kind of a bit of a violin prodigy. Right, his father also played violin, so he would play violin, and that's not, you know, that often kind of happens, you know, in every family. You have a parent who excels in some sort of craft or activity, and then the children sort of might gain a little bit of that interest. The fact that his father was a teacher of music is what we see, you know, same thing with Mozart's father was also a composer and a teacher. His father was a painter and a teacher. Paul, on the other hand, as a bit of a way of rebelling against his parents, decided to pursue visual art. Although I think what's interesting is that the way that he talked and wrote about art, the way he thought about art, he often used musical terms and analogies to describe his thinking in terms of art. And a lot of people will also look at his art very in terms of music as well. Like, I think Paul Klee, more than most other artists that I can think of off the top of my head, is probably inspired more musicians than any other visual artist that I can think of off the top of my head. You know, yes, there are people who made jazz music inspired by Jackson Pollock, for instance, but you know, I don't quite think in quite the direct way that musicians have been inspired by Paul Klee. Anyway, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So he studies painting in Munich at the Academy of Fine Arts. He has a illegitimate son with one of the models at the school, and then he also starts traveling around the world. So not all the way around the world, maybe around Europe and North Africa, and those trips that he takes become very foundational because he not only meets other artists, as we'll see here in just a couple of moments, but he also gets really inspired by the landscapes and the colors that he sees. Growing up in Switzerland, Switzerland's a relatively small country compared to other places in Europe. You know, it's maybe north central Europe. As you go further south in Europe, anyone who's been to Europe knows that the light is much warmer and brighter. And for someone who, like Paul Klee, who becomes obsessed with color, he writes constantly about like how his eyes and heart are awakened to the beautiful colors that he sees in southern France and Italy and in North Africa. Because the light is beautiful down there. It's one of the great reasons to visit that part of the world, especially if you're an artist. You know, Van Gogh, same sort of thing. Like, that's when he went down to Provence in the south of France, it blew his mind. That's where Matisse, who we just finished a whole week talking about, he moved to Nice. to spend the remainder of his life to see that beautiful light. So in 1906, he marries a piano player. They have a son together, Felix, and he tries to sort of make a go of it as an illustrator. And his drawings are pretty good, but probably not the kind of illustrations a lot of, companies want. They're pretty eccentric, and maybe if we even look at some of, you'll see here if we scroll through, his early. In fact, this is not even all that early. Looks like on the wiki art page they don't have. This is all stuff that is. So let's kind of come back to the Wikipedia page, because it doesn't seem like they have any of his early stuff there at all. Because by this time here, he's in his mid-20s. He's almost 30 years old when he gets married, right? So there's a little bit of financial difficulties in the family. On a trip to, or I guess he would have been in Munich at the time. I'm trying to remember the actual, how he runs into August Mack and Vasily Kandinsky. Kandinsky we talked about, was it last week or the week before? Is sort of this one-man art movement. He starts this group called Der Blue Rider, or the Blue Rider, based on one of Kandinsky's own paintings, and that group is really obsessed with the idea of the spiritual aspect of color. Remember, Kandinsky is, I think maybe who would say was doing this, Klee or Kandinsky or Mack or Franz Marc, who's coming up with these ideas at first. I think it's kind of all simultaneously, but there's this idea at the turn of the 20th century that artists don't have to describe things as they were, for thousands of years. Artists, the role of painting was to make a painting of a cup or a bowl of fruit or a person's face or a religious figure or a biblical scene, etc. All of that's evaporated because of photography. So now artists are thinking like, what do we do now? Let's really think about what it is we're doing. Why are we using color? Can color be something else? Can color have different meanings than just, if I was going to make a painting of this tube of paint, do I need to use yellow to do it? Or could I maybe try some other weird combination, right? So all of a sudden, all of these ideas in the air, these artists come together, form this group, which lasts really up until World War I. And World War I, and all these artists are exhibiting simultaneously. You see he goes to North Africa here. But World War I is, puts a quick end to that group and this excitement that is in the air all over Europe for this new avant-garde art movement. Cubism is beginning at this time, futurism, divisionism, like all of these isms are happening. World War I happens, and it's a disaster, especially for this group, the Blue Rider group, because the three of, I don't think Kandinsky enlisted in the war, because he went back to Russia, right? But a couple of Paul Klee is conscripted into the German army, as well as Mack and Mark, who die quite soon after the war begins. And that is obviously very traumatic, when you have half of your art movement dies within months of the war breaking out and going to the front. Paul Klee, I don't know the specifics about how he did this, but sort of does everything possible to get as far away from the front line as possible. And at one point, he's helping to repair airplanes, he's painting camouflage on airplanes, and manages to make it through the war with his life intact. And I'm sure that was a very traumatic experience. During the war, he's still making paintings the whole time. He's trying, he's painting on cardboard and scraps of paper. So, you know, here's some of the stuff that he's making during the war itself, right? So I think he ends up at the end of the war with like 400 or 500 paintings over a few years of period, which, you know, is certainly made good use of his free time during that conflict. And I don't think it's any small stretch to say that one of the things that happens out of World War I is there's a lot of disillusionment throughout the world, but particularly in Europe, where you have a lot of artists that had actually gone and fought in World War I, had seen the horror of the trenches, and it's really hard to describe how like horrific those scenes actually were. One of the major art movements that comes out of World War I is Dada, like literally D-A-D-A, and Dada is about this totally absurd type of art, because they just feel like the world has literally gone mad. What's the point in making work that isn't mad either? We need to reflect the insanity of the time. So they start making just totally, you know, nonsensical poems and songs, and the art gets silly and weird and strange, and that leads directly into surrealism. And you have Salvador Dali and Rene Magritte, two artists that we painted previously. And this is sort of Paul Klee's reaction to it, which is to kind of really go back and embrace children's art. In fact, one of the things that happens is that he's especially, well, and we'll talk about what happens. Maybe I'll just jump a little bit ahead. When World War II breaks out, Paul Klee is working alongside Kandinsky at the Bauhaus, which I think at that time was in Munich, and he is the Nazi stormtroopers bust into his studio. They destroy everything. He's harassed to the point where him and Kandinsky both leave the Bauhaus, which was really one of the most famous art school, modern art school at the time. And Kandinsky goes, I think just a few weeks ago, I try to remember where he went, but Paul Klee goes back to Switzerland, where he was originally from. But one of the things that happens is a lot of Paul Klee's work is hung in this exhibition called the Degenerate Art Exhibition. Adolf Hitler, the Nazi leader, organizes this show of all of the art that he thinks is degenerate, that was made by Jewish people, by homosexuals, by quote-unquote insane people and criminals. And, you know, the art that's as part of that exhibition is Matisse, Picasso, a lot of Paul Klee. And one of the things that Hitler highlights about Klee's work is this sort of infantile, like, my kid could do that kind of stuff, right? It just looks like some insane, crazy person did this. And on the other hand, there was what's really funny is that there was a simultaneous exhibition held next to the Degenerate Art Exhibition, which toured all over Germany and Austria. Next to it was an exhibition of art that Hitler did like, and it was all this, you know, people standing with flags and marching, blonde hair and blue-eyed, to get like the social realist kind of painting, people working in the fields, people putting rivets on tanks and stuff. That exhibition was like a ghost town. Everyone wanted to see what, quote-unquote, the degenerate art was, because that was where you could see all the Picassos and Matisses and all the great modern art of the time. Of course, most of that work was unfortunately destroyed. And there's been some really great exhibitions and books written about that whole thing. Here's, again, another beautiful painting. Anyway, I wanted to also mention, Klee also had his art exhibited alongside people from mental hospitals, and that's who was in a mental hospital 100 years ago is very different to what we think of people who have some mental health challenges today. There's a great book by Foucault called Madness and Civilization. That's a whole other topic. But you could see another thing about Paul Klee is he was one of the most prolific artists in human history. There were times where he would make 500, 800, 1,000, 1,500 paintings a year. So you're talking over the course of the 60 years that he was alive. I don't know exactly how many artworks he did ultimately create, and besides all the ones that were destroyed by the Nazis, you're talking somewhere in the realm of like 15,000, 20,000 paintings. And all of them are very different. You know, we can see here these grids and squares and portraits and animals. I mean, you know, he's sort of going back and forth in different styles and techniques, but all of them are also pretty different. Like, yeah, there's a little maybe Kandinsky and some of this, but, you know, they're all unique. Which, for a guy creating that much artwork, that's something to be said. And yet, you know, they all seem to have similar kind of palettes. They're exploring color, right? And, I mean, again, we could just keep on going here. The other thing, just before we move on and start making this painting, that I just want to kind of get the conversation started a little bit about here, is I mentioned at the top that Paul Klee, not only, obviously, he was very interested in children's art, and in his catalog raisonné that he put together, he included some of the drawings and paintings he did when he was like 1 and 2, 3 years old, which I've never seen anyone else do. Like, most of the time, the earliest painting you see an artist include in their, if they participate in their catalog raisonné at all, is stuff that maybe when they're 15 or 17, when they're in art school. Paul Klee really saw the work that he was doing when he was a child as being a really foundational, and this is where he began as an artist. I think that's really interesting. Anyway, for an artist who is associated with sort of, you know, a whimsical art that, you know, has a childlike aspect, he was also one of art's, like throughout the entire history of art, one of art's most profound, deepest thinkers, one of the most articulate, intelligent persons who wrote and lectured. Remember, he was one of the main teachers at the Bauhaus School of Art. He wrote all of these great texts. There's books about his notebooks that you can get. Here is a link to the actual, if you want to read it all online. Where's the link? I was looking at this earlier today. Oh, where did the link go? Okay, so here's the entire, what did they say, 3,900 page, you know, so and it's all in German, unfortunately. Of course, as soon as I try to flip through here, we won't find any actual images. That's why I got this one ready, because we just see some of the pictures that he included in here, just sort of talking about the relationships between color. I saw a link saying that he invented color theory. That's nowhere near the truth. There were artists for 600-700 years before that who were thinking about color theory. But again, Klee, just like his friend Kandinsky, really thought of color in a way that was different than prior artists, because they were really thinking about what can color do, rather than just like, you know, what can color mimic? You know, oh, what's the exact right combination to do a skin tone or to paint a reflection on a bottle, that kind of stuff. That's not what Paul Klee was interested at all. He was more interested to think like, if we put a orange and a yellow side by side, what feelings will that bring out in the viewer? Is there some kind of perfect combination that will elicit joy? Is there a combination that will make people feel sadness? And so on and so forth. A really interesting whole approach to painting. Today's painting, just before we start working on it, I just think this is at the Museum of Modern Art. The painting itself, 15 by 21 inches, or 38 by 50. So we're going to be painting on a 9 by 12. So basically this painting itself is about you know, you could fit 4 of these inside one of the inside the actual original painting. Okay, so again, upload your version of the painting to the page, and let's get started. So what we're going to do next is I think it might be helpful to do a little bit of outlining. That's the whole idea of the underpainting. So what we've got here is what's called the underdrawing. And sometimes artists do an underdrawing or an underpainting. Not usually both, because the underpainting can often be just exactly what we've done, which is to maybe paint directly instead of using a pencil or a pen, the lines or the structure of the composition first. So we do have these lines in here, and let's just take a look, I think, at the original and just maybe think, do we need to do underpainting, or can we get away with this as it is? So if I was to do an underpainting on here, it would be to kind of go over some of my pencil lines, make them a little bit darker. I don't know. I think I might just, my lines are pretty dark, so I think I might be fine if at the end I might just use a Posca pen to kind of outline, go back over some of these lines. But I think I'm good. Now you can see that this painting has been approached in a very similar way than what I've got here. He's also used this warm yellow as a foundational color in his paintings, or at least in this painting here, because we can see it kind of showing through. Right, so we're already right on track if you've got your warm yellow down here. I remember I said you don't need to do that, but now that I really look at it, it's like, yeah, I guess you really do need to put that warm yellow, assuming you want to get close to what he did. So if we're not going to do any outlining, then I think what we're going to do is jump right into actually starting to paint some aspects of this painting. So this looks like it's all nice and dry, ready to go. Let's start getting some paint on the palette. Now, right before we began, as I said, I was doing a special painting, finishing my Matisse series. So I've already got a little bit of paint on the palette. Now this has been sitting there for about an hour now, so it might be a little bit tacky, but I'm pretty confident that we can make work out of it. Just have to get everything that fell on the floor. God, missing my bullet. Oh, there's the bullet. Oh. So, what do we need on here? I mean, I think we're going to need all of the colors, but just think if I need a lot more of anything else. Got my warmer, let's get some. I probably won't need to use that black that I've got here. Blue, warm yellow. Okay. Oh, and white. So one of the things that I'll also probably do is cut this open at some point, this tube of paint, and then I scoop this out, and then I can put them into jars like this. Here's my white in there. But I think it's deceptive how much paint as actually, you know what? This looks like we're going to be down to the rest here. I used to have a little spatula here for scooping paint out. Oh, here it is. Here's my little spatula. So we'll use this here when I need it. I'll just kind of wait. Okay, so let's look at these paintings side by side. What is the first thing we should do? I think let's probably paint some of this lighter brownish white in here, because then we can paint some other things over top of it. I think that's what I want to do first. Paula says, "Hi Michael, may I ask what spontaneous episode you made? Can we watch it too?" Yeah. So it's on the it's on the YouTubes on my channel now. It was just an hour long, just looking at all the Matisse episodes, so you can go back and watch that one there. It should also be in the playlist for this episode. The playlist for this episode is down in the description below. So what we want is kind of a bit of a brown. So I'm going to take this, oops, let's go right here. Whoa. Splattering paint all over. I'm going to take some of this warm yellow, some warm red, mix an orange. It was a little much orange, a little more, too much red, but that's okay. Take some blue and mix this together. We're going to get a kind of a darker brown, maybe a little bit darker than I was hoping. It's okay. We're going to use a color like this anyway, but not just yet. I mean, basically you could see that color is everywhere in this painting, but I want to get something much lighter. So let's just try to get as much paint off here. And let's mix this into our white. Okay. And you know, just to make things a little bit more transparent, I'm going to put a bit of this matte medium in here. And that's just going to help allow a little bit of this yellow that I painted as part of my Imprimatura to shine through a little bit. Okay. And then I'm going to actually paint this with a little bit of a smaller brush. It's faster if I use my big brush, but I think that would sort of miss a little bit of what he's doing in this painting. So basically, I'm going to paint everything, but leave a little bit of a gap here. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a space. Between all of these lines. Right, I'm going to do all of the... I'm just going to paint the entire painting this way. I think. Let me just... I'm not exactly sure, but I think I'm going to do this. We'll see as I just I haven't explored the whole thing. Maybe I just need to back out now that we kind of understand how I'm going to approach this. Now you don't have to be too like a perfectionist here. just leaving like that's maybe like a centimeter or a 1/16 of, not a centimeter, like a couple millimeters or like a 1/16 of an inch between the pencil lines, or on either side of the pencil line. And there's something about using a kind of a brush that's maybe a little bit small that's going to help get a little bit more, just that feeling of the brush texture in here. You know, a good use for your big brush is to sort of hide marks, right? Hide brush strokes when you use a big brush. But I want to maybe have some of those little brush strokes remain visible. Now, I don't know how it looks exactly on camera on your side, but you know, again, someone might be inclined to say, well, what about instead of doing it this way, what if I just actually, because this looks kind of white again, even though it's nowhere near white, but right, that's a white paper and certainly not the white of the canvas. But what about if I just paint yellow on either side of the lines instead of doing it this way, which you know, I suppose you could try doing. Let's go over top of all this. But again, I think that your results are going to be mixed. There's a lot of comments in the chat there. Wow, okay. I'm going to try to... It's very hard for me to paint and read all of these comments, so I'll try my best to tackle all that when we get a little bit further in here. Right, already there's like a kind of Paul Klee-ish quality unfolding in this painting, just the way that we're giving this kind of outline, or it kind of looks, it almost looks like the darker lines are glowing a little bit because of the way that we're painting it. I think I'm going to leave the inside of the eye alone, because that's going to help us get a bit of a darker color inside there, I think. So we'll just paint the quote-unquote white of the eyes here. And you know, I think what's kind of interesting about a guy like Paul Klee and this kind of painting is, as sort of simple and fun as this painting might look, this is also a guy, by this point, you know, he would have been, what, I guess like 48, 50 or so, I think, almost. And he's written and been teaching at the university level for like, what, 6-7 years. Like, there's a lot of thought and theory in a painting like this. You know, it sort of just looks kind of very fun and maybe even a little bit silly. For him, this is like the culmination of a lot of deep thinking onto the way color works. So just everything that I'm doing here, I start thinking, there's, you know, probably... he would have like a very strong opinion as to why he did everything in here. which is like really fascinating. There's not that many other artists. Like a lot of artists let their painting do the talking kind of thing, whereas Paul Klee he lets his painting do the talking, but he also does a lot of talking as well. So this is an area, I think this is just the canvas had stuck to something at some point, maybe while I was gessoing them. So I'm just doing a little touch-up as we go here. Let's do the inside of this bird. In fact, maybe while that's drying for a second, I just want to show you on the Museum of Modern Art's website for this painting. Where is it? It's interesting the way they describe this. They wanted to one of the early terms that artists used for abstract painting was pure painting. That idea that you're painting you're purely painting. That's all you're doing. You're not trying to paint something else. You're purely painting. So, which I think is a really interesting way to think about abstract painting. Not necessarily that I agree with it, but that certainly, again, also kind of helps tell you some of the ideas behind abstract painting. So here he says the priority freedom to create images dealing less with perception than with thought, so that the bird in this picture seems to not fly in front of the cat's forehead but be inside of it. The bird is literally on the cat's mind. Stressing this point by making the cat all head, Klee concentrates on thought, fantasy, appetite, the hungers of the brain. One of his aims as an artist, he said, was to make secret visions visible. Oh, it's very interesting. I mean, again, some people are probably thinking like, are you kidding me? It's a painting of a cat with a bird on it, and it looks like it was drawn by a 5-year-old. This sounds like a lot of, like, you know, bourgeois art writers blowing a lot of hot air, which people, I'm sure even at the time he made this painting, there was that type of a criticism out there. But, you know, if you're going to devote your life to making a painting like this, it is, you know, you have a lot of time to be thinking about things, and things do get more complex, right? So, I don't know, I just find that kind of thing very, very interesting. Okay, so that was our first little pass on the background. Let's look at this painting now and just think about what we want to do next. So I think we could, it doesn't matter what we do next. I'm just maybe if we paint some, in fact, what if we start, I'm just trying to think of what are some of the main things in here, the biggest areas to get. In fact, we got that brown. Let's actually start using that brown. So instead of mixing a whole new color, let's just use the color we've already mixed here. So this color that we used to make this color, because we just mixed this and then diluted it with some white and matte medium, we can still use this color. In fact, I think we'll use we can even just take it and mix it right in here, because we probably want to make it not quite as dark as this, at least at first. So we can take this, again, take some of our matte medium. There's a little bit of white in there. And then we can just maybe kind of go around and try to build up maybe some of the darker areas. Oops. And I kind of want to do this kind of quickly. There's kind of an aspect to Klee, which is there's kind of a spontaneous, quick approach to painting. A little bit in between these eyes. And I might be lightening some of this up again. You know, I don't want to get too focused on being perfect at any stage, but really not. It's certainly not when I'm just beginning. You know, there's so many other places in life where we can try to be perfect. We can try to be perfect citizens. We can try to be perfect parents and siblings and children. I think art is a place where we have we're invited to play and to sort of let your freak flag fly, as they say. Allow yourself to indulge your silliness, your whimsical qualities. And if there's anyone who should inspire you to do that, it's someone like Paul Klee. And also, I should have mentioned, I've heard his name mentioned as Paul Klee, like sort of Klee, but like clay, like modeling clay. So I'm sure there's probably someone who will watch this video at some point whose ears are just burning every time I say his name incorrectly, and there's some people who be like, no, actually they're wrong, you're right. And because, you know, everyone always agrees at some point on the internet, right? Everyone, you know, talks civilly and is respectful of one another. No one ever sort of behaves rudely on the internet. Okay, I'll put this back. So I actually just got a little bit of darker paint on there that didn't have as much white, so that just sort of came out accidentally, but you know, that's where I was about to go to next, so I'm just going to leave that there, and we'll just slowly start moving into that next phase here. So I'm just going to now take some of this paint, which is much darker. I still don't think I'm quite ready to go dark, dark, dark yet, but we can start moving in that direction. And so there's a little bit of like dry brush technique going on here. As the paint, rather than just sort of taking big blobs of paint, I sometimes just allow the brush to get kind of dry. And then you're just sort of very lightly kind of spreading it around. In fact, this area, I do want to lighten it up a bit. Okay, that's good. I think for that little bit there. Let's move on to, I think let's do this dark blue, the cold kind of teal color. Or I guess all teal is just technically a pretty cold color. I suppose it's possible to do a warmer teal. But okay, so let's take some of our cool yellow and cool blue. We mix these together, we get this green. I don't know if we have quite that green just like that. So that tells me it's a little bit too much yellow. Let's put a bit more blue in there. On camera, I think that's right. I'm gonna put a little bit more blue in there because I think in person it's still a little bit more bluish than the way it looks on camera. Okay, again, that's pretty good for right now. I'm gonna put a little bit of matte medium into it, however. Oh, that's maybe too much, but that's okay. Just because I want to have it again a little bit more transparent. You know, we've done this kind of thing with like glazing fluid in the past as well, on some of our more complex paintings, but this just maybe makes it a little bit easier for a beginner to, it's a little bit maybe more accessible material too. Let's just paint this whole thing like that. I'm just going to take my finger and blend that out. Right, this is not blending like exactly the way I want, but if you get into a situation where it's really falling apart, you can just take a rag, get a little bit of water on it. That's quite a lot, actually. And we can just wipe some of it away. And I'm not even too concerned about wiping it all away and making it kind of perfectly clean, because I kind of like that little, like, he's got a bit of that sort of dirtiness around here where it seems like, you know, he's just allowing it to kind of get a little bit kind of wild. Same sort of thing. I kind of went a little far here, so let's just take that back. This is going to get much darker, those eyes, obviously. In fact, I think this color is just a little bit too solid, so let's take a bit more of the matte medium and make it a little bit more transparent. And I think starting around here, I might become a little bit less focused on trying to keep the yellow in between these lines quite as visible. It was certainly necessary earlier on. So, when I paint with this, one of the things that just immediately comes to mind, it reminds me of painting Easter eggs. Like Ukrainian Easter eggs, I remember, or just, I don't, do people still do that, paint eggs, even if you weren't Ukrainian? And I remember I used to get these little kits, and used to paint eggs, and it had this kind of, you were basically dyeing the eggs a color. This is what this especially this matte medium in here reminds me of. Okay. Maybe just a... Okay. So I think I might, just before I move on, just decide to take a little bit more of the color and just build up maybe a little bit more saturation in a few places. That's maybe a little much. So I'm just going to take this rag again, the same rag that I was wiping some stuff away, and I can just sort of clean that up. So remember, this is intended to be a painting for some of our beginners, so I just really want to try to have a little bit of fun with today's painting. And if my own painting style tends to be pretty saturated colors to begin with, a little bit of a bolder palette. So I'm certainly not going to hide from that. It's just something that I tend to kind of like, but if you're a beginner, you can sort of, depending on how you want to go, you can kind of lean into it or away from it. I'm going to come back and do more work on those, but that's just sort of where I'm at this stage. Also, you can see I kind of made this a little bit bigger. I went out. I'm going to put some white back into these eyes towards the very end. So if I feel like, this is too dark, I can just, by putting white glaze, kind of trim this down, that intensity. Maybe before I actually, I'm going to take a bit of blue and take my warm blue and my cold blue, mix these together. I'm also going to take just a bit of warm red, and that's going to really make this color really dark. Now, I don't know if I want it to be quite that dark, and I still want it to be kind of a little bit of this teal green color, so it's going to mix it into here. Just trying to find the right mixture here. I think that's close to what we want. Oh, I should have just waited for this to dry because it's still pretty wet. you see how it just wipes that paint away? I try to apply my dark color and it just sort of wipes it right off. So that just tells me I should probably let that sit. I'm going to take this same color. I'm just going to get a bit of the glaze, or well, not glazing fluid. This is my matte medium, right? Just get a little bit of that on, and then I'm just going to do a little. Oops, I think this needs to be a little bit more blue, a little less green. You know, I'm going to paint that a little bit darker, and I'm going to come back and clean that up with some white. So I'm going to do this in a few places. Only time will tell if this was a smart idea or not, but here on this tail. I'll do this just a little bit on the edges of this creature, because when I go over top of it with that other color, it's going to really pop. And I'll dry brush that. So again, I'm just going to wipe a bunch of paint off, and then I can just sort of go and scrub a bit too. Okay. Doing pretty good. I sometimes get a little bit afraid that I am getting too far in the weeds, especially when I'm doing a beginner's painting. I want to try to keep things light. So the next stage here, you know, I've been painting on the foreground, but I just again want to try to break things up. So I've kind of put a bunch of color mostly into the background, and I guess you could see the cat's face is the foreground, so we've already spent a little bit of time on the foreground, but I want to now add some reds and pinks in here, and then start going back into the white, so, and maybe actually a little bit of brown. So So we definitely have a cool magenta color here with some white. And same thing up here. And then he's gone in with a warmer red in places. Especially you can see with his nose. That's definitely a warm red. So, what should we do first? Let's take our magenta. Take a bit of matte medium, just a little bit thinner. Let's add a little bit of white to it as well. Where should we start? So far I've just been using my finger to blend. You can also just use another brush just to kind of go around and try to soften your edges a bit. Now it's obviously best to do this when the paint is nice and wet, so I'll just put some more paint here like that, and then kind of just scrubbing that away a bit. And then I want to make sure it's nice and dry, so I have to rub it against my hand. So, you know, one of the things I'm noticing is that the matte medium, using it as an alternative for glaze, not working out quite so well. It doesn't blend as nicely as the glaze does, which is not surprising because that's exactly what glaze is for. So I think going forward, I'm going to use my glazing fluid as opposed to matte medium. I'm always just sort of interested to see how much I can get away with, though, with any medium that I have. Okay. So let's come back up to the top here. Got a little bit of that. Zoom back out. Anywhere else it needs this pink? I don't think so. So I'll just wipe that paint off. And now I'm going to go to my warm red. Looks like things are kind of dry. So let's come back up here. Nice bright red heart for a nose. Right, I'm also going to take this red and go over some of the areas in the center there as well, but let's... Wow, there's so many comments. So I'll try to get through as much as I can here. You know, now that I do, I'm like, maybe I should have done this before I put the magenta on. I don't know. sort of thing down here. Take my brush, just sort of soften that a bit. Just got a little bit there, maybe. Maybe I'm just seeing things, which is totally fine. So that just kind of inspired me to soften all of this up. It's going to turn into a bit of a mess, but that's okay. Okay. All right, we still got a little ways to go. We'll be done in about 35 minutes. Maybe I just want to, there's a lot of comments here in the chat. Whoa, okay. There's Tanya, Roxana, Kathy, Pascal, Lolly. Whoa, okay, let's see if... Kathy says, hey everyone, looking forward to some peaceful painting time. This looks like an interesting one. Tanya was painting the Imprimatura as we were getting started. Kathy was working in the garden. Oh, Rock says, did you say use white and warm yellow, or warm yellow and a little bit of water? Sorry if I just saw that now. Did I say white? I definitely, I could have said white for sure. Yeah, definitely a yellow wash. Look at that. I love having all these people who've watched a while and kind of know what I'm up to so that they can help answer questions while I'm busy here. That's so cool. Ollie says I get my panic on if I lose my outlines. Pascal says, yeah, the world is going nuts. It's time for another Neo-Dada movement. Yes. I mean, there has already been a Neo-Dada movement, but we could have a Neo-Dada. I remember talking about this as part of their therapy program. Okay, I'm only halfway through all these comments, but I want to get back to the painting. Otherwise, I feel like I'll be just reading comments all episode. Okay, so if we look at this side by side, next thing I want to do... Oh, I could have put a little bit more of this blue under here. Right, sometimes you just notice these little things. A little bit of that there. Okay. Let's go to the brown. Let's do another darker version of this brown, and I'm gonna have to mix it again because the one that I used is out. So that's fine. I like mixing those colors again and again. It helps me to sort of practice my color mixing. So I think we'll need a bit more warm yellow. Oh yes. Sloppy fart sound. Love it. Right, so you can see how much yellow to red, like maybe 5 to 1. At least at this stage. Maybe I'll need more here in a moment. And a little bit of blue. That's a lot, so let's put that in. So again, 5 to 1 yellow and blue. Now that color I like. Now I just want to see, do we have that color in here? I could see a little bit of it on the cheek there with a little bit of white. So maybe let's do that before I go too much further. Gotta clean this brush. And I'm just wondering, let's just take this color, see if I just paint it here. Not too far off if I just paint that in there. But I am just going to take a little bit of white and mix this in here. Anyway. You know, most paintings are just are a result of building up layers of paint on a surface. And even though Klee is sort of a modern artist who's challenging everything that happened before, there's still, you can't completely break away from history. So we're still going to see some of those same approaches in here. And I do really think the more you build up different little layers in a painting, the more it gives you much more options. It just feels more complete. It just feels more complex. Right, like even right now, I'm not even really looking at the original. Like that color's not really supposed to go there. It's supposed to be a little bit whiter, which I'm going to put there shortly. But if you get like the inspiration to do something, just because we're trying to paint this painting doesn't mean you have to like, no, I can't do that because that's not exactly what I see here. It's like, who says that? Who says that it has to be exactly like the original? If you feel inspired, like we just saw a few of those paintings that Lori had posted on the group there that were really taking some major liberties with Matisse's painting. If Matisse was alive, I'm sure he'd be like, yeah, that's pretty cool. Huh. You know, he's probably sitting there, some other dimension, if you want to call it heaven, just looking down going, huh, that's pretty wild. What an interesting interpretation of my painting. Okay, now I'm just going to take this this brown that I mixed. I want to make it a little bit darker, maybe a little bit more, so this is kind of a bit of an orange brown. I want a bit more of a earthy reddish brown. So we're just adding a little bit more red in here. It's immediately going in that direction. And if I maybe just a bit more red. You can see it, when I do this, I just add a little bit at each time. I don't just sort of launch in with a big gob of paint. When I teach in classes, people often just do just that. They just be like, "Oh, we're supposed to add red," and they will literally take a tube of paint and go. And I said, "No, just a tiny dab." Like, "Oh, I misunderstood," and you're like, "Man, just slow down." So, taking this brown. And let's come back into his view. I mean, he's probably even using a rag, you know, to kind of blend, and you might even be using a stamping technique here. But you see what happens when we start building up these, I don't even know if it's coming across on camera, but when we start building up little layers of paint, everything just seems to get more all those colors start to mix, and it does something that you just can't do if you just say, okay, I'm just going to mix this color exactly like it is there. Like, good luck. In fact, it's going to take it 10 times longer. I don't think it's going to turn out nearly as well, and you're just going to be frustrated. So just using this little rag with a little bit of moisture in there. Let's do. Remember, I'm going to come back and add white as one of my final things on here, so we can really build up this surface with the intent of kind of tinting everything back down a bit. And that's up to you as to like at what point, you know, how much white do you want to take this? So we're still about 10 minutes away from that stage here, so. This brown right here on the cheek. And we're going to get even one more stage darker as well, in case you're wondering. I like using this rag like that. I don't usually do this ever. If those of you who've been watching me for a while, I notice I almost never do this, but this is a kind of a style that calls for it, right? To help that blending process. I mean, obviously he's using oil paint. He lived long before acrylic paint even existed. But especially, you know, if you're using oil paint, you would do something very similar. You just have a rag, instead of water, you'd have a little bit of turpentine, or what is more commonly used today is odorless mineral spirits, OMS. Okay. That's coming along. Let's get the in fact, let's do this. I'm going to take this paint. Let's mix more of it. We're not going to need too much more. And let's take our red. We'll make it, this is a much darker brown. Or not much, just another step down in terms of darkness. So still that warm yellow is the primary color in this brown. But let's take a bit more red. In fact, I'll even mix my red and blue, my warm red, warm blue together off to the side here. So you get a much darker color, and then I can just add a bit of it to here. And then if I want to make it even darker, I just pull a bit more of that in. Now that's almost a little bit, this is a good brown, but it's maybe a little bit too much blue. So let's put a bit more red back into this. So it's still going to be darker, but it's going to be a little bit more reddish, dark reddish brown. Because I'm just looking at the image there, we still got a kind of a red brown. Don't want to go too far. There we go. Now, this is looking pretty close to what I see on the screen, but on camera, it's looking much brighter and more orangey than it really should be. Kind of works like magic using the rag like that. this is something that maybe I got to use a little bit more in my repertoire of techniques. Like how it softens large areas. It's again, just like any technique, you need to kind of, you know, use it and for a while before it really, you can make it really work for you. But I think that's getting there. I'm gonna take the smaller brush again, and I want to just come, because I'm getting closer to putting my white back in here. So I'm approaching my, you know, just getting closer towards starting to do some final touches here. So, oops. This is just the same dark blue that I made by adding some ultramarine, my warm blue, into my green, which I used my teal that in a few other places here. So I'm just adding a little bit of it's almost like I'm doing almost a kind of an underpainting quality here. All of these. In fact, I'm going to take a little bit more matte medium just to thin it. Oh. Take this darker blue, I'm going to bring it into my brown here actually. So I got a little bit of work ahead of me just to clean some of this up with a little bit of white in between all those lines, but So this, I don't think I'll do some dark black lines at any stage anymore. This will sort of be kind of my outlining. Just doing another layer of the same dark blue. It's a dark teal that I just put more blue into my teal. Dark brown. In my brown up here, the brown that I've mixed with some of the blue. I'm also going to take that same darker brown and I'm going to come up here to the bird, which we've kind of neglected a lot of today. I'm going to paint this kind of darker. Then I'm going to put a little white dot in the center, and then I'm going to it'll look like I've outlined it. So let's come back out. Actually, well, how about let's put that little white dot that I was just talking about, since we're right here. I'll clean my... Oh, is the music stopped in the background? It says it's still playing. Oh, what? Okay, hold on. Sometimes that app crashes. Come on. Sorry, I'm just a little There we go. Okay, beautiful. It should still be... Maybe it just stopped because I was... Curious to hear if you can hear music again there. Actually, now if I put that yellow in there, it might be a little intense. Let's take some white and mix it in with that yellow. Just not so bright. So that kind of technique is a little bit easier to, if we do that, then we can get the appearance of the outline without actually having to do a difficult outline around there. Okay, and I'll do the dark dot once that dries. Okay, I mean, you know, you could, if you're at this stage, you probably could call it a day. You know, if you got here and you're happy with it, by all means, that's all you need, right? If you're happy, I'm happy. I do just want to take, you know, another few minutes here to get a little bit of white and just come back and just clean things up a little bit. So that brings us to our final touches for today's painting. I'm going to add a little bit of white back into a few places just to brighten it back up, maybe in these eyes. Or it's not going to be a pure white, it's going to have a little bit of brown in there. And then I think we'll be done. I mean, we don't... Again, today's supposed to be just a basic episode for beginner painters, so I don't want to go too crazy. So let's grab probably maybe a mid-sized brush, you know, like a brush size of my pinky. And I'm going to take this same color we had here earlier, which was our brown, right? Our tan brown. It was mostly warm yellow, a little bit of warm red, a little bit of warm blue, and a lot of white, and a little bit of matte medium. Now, a lot of this is kind of started to dry up a bit. It's the same color. I could even say maybe even a bit of gray in there, but let's just stick with the simple route. I put a little bit of matte medium in there just to keep it a little bit thinner so that I can see everything I put down, because if I start mixing white into any color, that white is going to become very opaque. You're not going to be able to it will block out everything in below. Right, even there I just put a little bit more white in, and I always just think like, it could just totally obliterate everything in there. So let's put a bit more matte medium. Now, if you want, you can take your time doing this and do many thin layers of white. I want to try to wrap up in about 10 minutes, so I'm just taking a bit more of a leap. I'm going to keep my little rag around here to kind of blend things. And you can use your finger for some of this too. Maybe we'll come and zoom in here. So even if it's not perfect, I'm just gonna let it kind of sit like that, and it'll start to dry. as I just sit here and tinker with it. I can't help myself. Oh my goodness. I'm going to take a little brush and get it probably a little more even than I'm using with my finger. Or let's do the other side. Do a little bit of this on the cheek of the cat as well. A little bit down there too. Did I need to do that? I don't know. Maybe I'm just gonna wipe that off. Even though it's kind of there, I didn't like the look that it made on my painting. Just back out a bit here. Okay. So you can decide how much of this you want to put on here. Like, this is a pretty strong glaze, I guess. That's basically what I'm doing with this matte medium. If you know, because I just want to try to get it done quickly, but you can, by just adding less paint, or you have more matte medium or glazing fluid, you're going to get a more subtle effect. You know, it does make me think maybe I want to come back and add a little bit of color back on top of that. In some places it's a little bit intense. I can even take a bit of this here. Because he's clearly done something like this right in this area. I mean, probably being a little bit like he's mixing a brown. It's, you know, whereas I'm just sort of taking a generic brownish white and applying it in here. Let's go to the other ear. I mean, I kind of like the way that looks right there, especially on camera, but It's not so bad either. Back into this eye. Other eye, just cleaning this up even more. What else needs to be done? Maybe, okay, in between these whiskers. Bit in the mouth here too. Okay. Getting closer and closer every little bit here. You know, again, this is, for some places like this, it's a little bit, I'm going to have to do a little bit more. And some other places it seems like it's really, really opaque. So this is, right now, this is sort of like an in-between. And if I'm going to wait for that to dry and then it'll come back. So let's zoom back out and just see how we're doing and what, if any major things need to be done. I was a little bit heavy-handed in some of these areas, so I'm gonna do another bit more white here and then add brown back over top because I think it was just too dark right here. I notice now, you know, again, sometimes it's like the longer I look at the painting, the more it tells me little things that I missed the first time around. That's one of my absolute favorite things about doing these episodes, is that it gives me a real, like, I don't really give myself that much time or permission to really look at some of my favorite artworks. And when you try to recreate them, you have to look closely. And all of a sudden, the more you look, you're like, you just start seeing this whole world of information. And all these revelations are constantly happening in my mind of how all these artists made these works. And that's really exciting. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit more white into this color as I go into the eyes in here, just to, well, that was a lot. That's a lot of white. Maybe not quite as, that's a bit much. So let's just take some of this tan color and bring it back in here. I think I was a little heavy with the white in there, a little bit impatient. I don't mind that so much, but just something to be mindful of. Okay, let's I'm gonna take, this is my black from, I haven't used it at all. I'm just gonna use it for this eye. A little dot there, pretty ridiculous, but I haven't quite captured what he did in those, in that. Maybe should I go back over it? I don't know. I'm just debating whether I just say. You know what? I'm gonna zoom in. I was using black for some of those little dots on the tail, and it just seemed a little bit not just too dark. So here's my dark blue again. Now I am tempted to maybe go back with a little bit more warm red right here. And oops. It's a bit more of a magenta now that I see. That's okay. I had it right the first time, didn't I? Take some magenta, quickly just brush this into my warm red, because really I think the warm red should just be for the tip of the nose of the cat. I am tempted to continue painting for like another hour, but I also just want to think about keeping it simple, stupid, right? I see Paul says, why the cat's eye iris is in a line. I mean, I don't know anything about cats and cat anatomy. I don't have a cat. I always thought that that's sort of, isn't that how cats' eyes look? Aren't they kind of oval shaped, not as unlike human eyes? I don't know. You have to ask Paul Klee why, if that's not how they were done. That I mean, I thought that that's how the cat's eyes look, but it's been at least a couple of years since I last saw a cat. So, yeah, you know what? Let's just. There's definitely aspects of this that could be improved, but. why I did a capital L in there. Looks like Klee, Paul Klee. As like McDonald's. Funny things happen when you make paintings. Your brain kind of goes a little funny. Okay. So, we'll just do our final side-by-side comparison and take a look at this painting and how it turned out. So... there's the two of them side by side. Yeah, for like an hour and a half of painting, I can walk away feeling pretty good about that. Again, maybe would have, if I had taken longer, I would have done a lot of things a little bit differently. In fact, I probably would go back with a little bit of brown. Some of this white's pretty intense. But, you know, if you're just a beginner painter, I think you'd probably feel pretty satisfied if you got your painting to about this level. You can see, we could still see the radiating lines coming through from our initial underdrawing from the image transfer. They are barely visible here, and that, I was taking kind of pains to try to make sure that they didn't disappear entirely. His signature is up here too. I'm gonna just, for right now, I'm just gonna leave it like that. Yeah, I really like this little heart here. I didn't even notice that until we began. I'm like, oh, there's a heart there. That's cool. Okay, thank you everyone for painting along with me. This was a really fun, simple little painting. I hope I didn't overcomplicate it. You certainly should feel welcome to take your own little version, whether you use different colors, whether you paint more solid colors. You know, I built up a few layers of browns and stuff in there. I could see someone doing like almost like a stained glass version of very solid colors on this. Or you, even with cutout paper like we did with Matisse. Hey, there's so many different ways you could do this. Okay, everyone, on Thursday this week, we're going to be painting a very famous Paul Cézanne painting. We've talked about Cézanne many times because of the influence he had on people like Picasso and all of the Cubists. So Thursday, we're going to go right to the heart of the man, and we're going to continue looking at some of the most expensive paintings ever purchased before. So this is going down, I think it's number 37 on that list. Okay, everybody. In the meantime, everybody enjoy the rest of your evening. Go and watch the video we did just earlier today on Matisse. And I'd love to see in the comments your vote as to which one you like the best. Do you agree with my votes of the paintings I liked that I did? Or do you have some different feelings? Curious. Okay, everyone. We'll talk to you again very, very soon. Good night.